Welcome back to the deep dive. This is where we take that, well, frankly intimidating stack of sourcey docs, legal briefs, economic reports, and really break it down. We aim for structured, accessible, but deeply analytical knowledge.
Exactly.
Our mission today, like always, is synthesis. We're aiming this squarely at you, the serious learner, maybe prepping for exams, a big presentation, or maybe you just want that crucial context behind the headlines. We'll give you the core concepts, lay out the different perspectives, and really dig into the policy implications.
And we have quite a range today, haven't we? We're looking at challenges that seem separate but are actually quite connected. Think about judicial views on reproductive rights, then shifting to how we finance environmental protection, and even the global challenges to existing financial systems. So the goal isn't just reciting news. It's about giving you the analytical tools to understand these big institutional and political shifts happening nationally and globally.
Absolutely, and we're jumping right in. First up, a big constitutional and political clash over electoral integrity, plus a hard look at the reality on the ground in Bihar.
Then we pivot.
Yeah, then we pivot to law. The Supreme Court's role in reviewing surrogacy rules and the misuse of the POCSO Act. After that, global shifts the push for de-dollarization with BRICS pay and that really disturbing crisis of cross-border scam operations.
And finally, we'll spend some good time on India's environmental governance specifically, moving beyond just planting trees to building real ecological resilience, before taking a pretty fascinating leap to the frontiers of physics, quantum gravity, no less.
It was a lot to cover, but we'll make sure it flows and gives you that depth. So let's get into the source material. Okay, let's start with something fundamental to democracy, the electoral roll. How accurate is it? The Election Commission, the EC, just launched Phase 2 of its big cleanup drive. It's called the Special Intensive Revision, or SIR 2.0. This is massive. 9 states, 3 union territories, impacting maybe 51 crore voters. On the face of it, it sounds like necessary admin, cleaning up duplicates, deceased voters, getting the list right.
It is essential admin, yes, absolutely. But the way they're doing it has immediately sparked these really significant legal and political fights that go right to the heart of constitutional governance, actually.
How so? What's the mechanism causing the friction?
Well, the EC has booth-level officers, BLOs, going door to door, handing out these partially filled enumeration forms. The idea is to gather current info, find those duplicates or people who've moved or passed away. But that specific procedure, using these forms, that's where the battle lines are drawn. For anyone trying to understand this, especially for, say, UPSC prep, getting this legal structure is key.
And the political reaction was swift, very strong. I remember West Bengal CM Mamata Banerjee calling it silent, invisible rigging, the suggestion being it's designed to knock off voters who might oppose the ruling party.
That was the immediate political framing, yes. But it went beyond just rhetoric. It landed straight in the Supreme Court.
Ah, okay. Who took it there?
The DMK in Tamil Nadu, they filed a challenge arguing this whole SR 2.0 exercise is, and I quote, arbitrary and unreasonable. They claimed it has a massive potential for disenfranchisement.
Disenfranchisement? That's a heavy charge.
It is. And importantly, the DMK didn't just frame it as poor administration. They linked it directly to 2 constitutional pillars. First, Article 326, the right to universal adult suffrage. Second, and this is more subtle, Article 19A, the fundamental right to political expression. Their point, your vote is your ultimate political voice. Blocking that access hits fundamental rights.
That connection from a technical form to fundamental expression, that's legally quite powerful, isn't it? What were the specific technical or legal grounds the DMK used against the EC's method?
They drilled down into some really critical operational details. Things they said made the whole process legally questionable or extra statutory and arbitrary. First, they argued these enumeration forms the BLOs are using. They're not actually mentioned anywhere in the main law governing elections, the Representation of the People Act, 1950 URPA. So if the foundational law doesn't define the tool being used, the argument goes the EC is acting outside its clear legal mandate. This directly challenges Section 21 of ROPA, which deals with how electoral rolls should be revised periodically.
Okay, so the argument is the EC can revise the rolls periodically, that's in the law, but launching a massive intensive revision across the country using new non-statutory forms that exceeds their powers unless they can first prove there's a huge system-wide problem justifying it.
Exactly that. They're saying you can't just launch such an extraordinary measure without solid empirical evidence showing it's needed on this scale. Congress MP Manish Tiwari raised similar questions about the mandate too. And the DMK went further on the procedural hurdles. They criticized the list of 13 documents the EC approved for proving eligibility. They pointed out that really common IDs, things people readily have, like PAN cards, even the voter ID card itself, the EPICs, were inexplicably left off that list.
Wait a second. The voter roll is based on the EPIC number. How can the EPIC itself not be sufficient proof for the revision of that same roll? That seems counterintuitive, almost designed to cause problems.
It certainly adds a layer of procedural complexity, doesn't it? And the fear, the core concern expressed, is what happens next. Imagine a voter, maybe someone less educated, or a migrant worker who's out of state, doesn't get this form or doesn't return it. What happens then?
The BLO has to decide something.
Exactly. The BLO is left with the subjective criteria to mark them as absent, shifted, or dead. The DMK's legal argument is that without clear statutory guidelines for these BLOs, the whole process risks becoming this massive deletion exercise based on subjective calls, which leads, they argue, to mass exclusion, what the opposition calls disenfranchisement.
This deletion issue really brings us to the problem the EC says it's trying to fix: duplicate entries. People registered in multiple places, often different states. Europa is very clear you can't do that.
Absolutely clear. Sections 17 and 18 strictly forbid multiple registrations, and Section 23(2) puts a clear duty on the electoral registration officers, the EROs. When a voter moves and registers somewhere new, the EROs must coordinate to remove the old entry.
But we know this doesn't always happen. These duplicates persist. Sometimes lakhs of voters registered in, say, Bihar and West Bengal.
Correct. And this is where, for anyone studying Indian administration, the distinction is crucial. This isn't really a technological failure, it's an administrative one.
Explain that. We have the ESANET system, right? Isn't that a national database?
Yes. ESANET, managed by CDAC, is a fully digital, centralized database. It uses the unique EPIC number. It can and does flag potential duplicates almost instantly when someone tries to register again. The system can see the double entry.
So where's the breakdown?
The failure happens in the deletion step. The EROs, maybe they're overworked, maybe the coordination between states isn't rigorous enough. They often fail to promptly delete the older record when the new one is created. It's human and procedural follow-through.
So ESANET gives the potential for a clean roll, but the human element, inertia, workload, lack of coordination stops that potential being fully realized.
Precisely. And that's why experts argue we need to move beyond this cycle of, let's call it, verification by ritual, these periodic intensive drives that cause political storms towards verification by design.
Verification by design, what does that look like?
It means building the checks into the system itself, making it almost self-correcting. This likely requires institutional changes, maybe even mandating integration with another highly credible national database like Aadhaar, used purely for verification, to instantly flag and perhaps even automate the dilution of duplicates.
But hang on. If the problem is fundamentally EROs not doing their job under Section 23(2), isn't bringing Aadhaar in kind of sidestepping the real issue, admitting we can't fix the administrative capacity itself?
That's a very sharp critique. It forces a really important question. Do we focus on strengthening the administrative bodies, the EROs, to follow the existing law perfectly? Or do we lean on technology to enforce compliance by basically removing discretion?
And mandating Aadhaar integration would likely face huge opposition too, right? Privacy concerns, surveillance fears?
Immense political cost, absolutely. But proponents would argue it's the fastest route to a perpetually accurate roll. It shifts the battleground. Today's opposition targets the process, the forms, the BLOs, the messiness. Integrating technology like Aadhaar potentially shifts the fight to challenging the institutional change itself, the very existence of a near-perfect, instantly verifiable database.
That sets up the stakes perfectly. Because all these fights over the electoral roll, they're ultimately about defining who gets to vote. And who votes defines who governs. Let's pivot now to a state where who governs hasn't necessarily changed who holds the wealth: Bihar.
Bihar is such a fascinating case study in that contrast. Politically, since the 1990s Mandal wave, you've had backward castes holding significant power for decades. Political democracy, in that sense, has been achieved.
But economic democracy, that seems to be lagging far behind.
Dramatically so. The political shifts haven't translated into fundamental changes in wealth distribution or economic opportunity. The data we have paints a really stark picture of this structural imbalance.
Let's hear some of those numbers.
Okay, look at the forward castes. They're about 15.5% of Bihar's population, yet they hold a hugely disproportionate share of economic power. They have 31% of all government jobs. And critically, they own over 80% of the state's large land holdings. That's defined as over 20 acres, based on survey data from around 2011-2019.
80% of large land holdings for just 15.5% of the people. That's concentration.
It is. And look at income. Around 10% of Ford-cast households earn over $50,000 a month. For OBCs, that drops to just 4%. For EBCs and scheduled castes, it's only 2%. And for scheduled tribes, less than 1%. The economic pyramid is incredibly steep and hasn't really flattened despite decades of political change at the top.
So the political leadership changed, but the economic baseline, institutional wealth, stayed largely concentrated in the same hands.
And this structural reality feeds into the two massive economic problems that Bihar's politics consistently fail to tackle head-on. First, that skewed land ownership, which limits opportunities for millions of small and marginal farmers. Second, the almost total absence of a significant agro-processing industry.
Bihar is incredibly fertile, though, isn't it?
Hugely fertile Gangetic plains. But instead of building food processing plants, packaging units, cold storage chains, things that would add value locally and create jobs, the state primarily exports raw agricultural produce. And crucially, it exports its people.
Which brings us squarely to the migration crisis. The 2011 census found almost 7.5 million migrants from Bihar working elsewhere in India. That number must be way higher now.
Far higher, certainly. Bihar has effectively become a giant labor supplier for the rest of India. It exports its most productive young people to build cities and work in factories in Chennai, Mumbai, Delhi, Bangalore, often for very low wages, maybe $10,000 a month. This whole dynamic shapes the current electoral battlefield.
Okay, let's break down how the main political players are strategizing in this context. The NDA, led by Nitish Kumar, their strategy leans heavily on the extremely backward classes, the EBCs.
Absolutely. The EBCs are a massive voting bloc, around 36% of the population. Historically, they've shown strong loyalty to Nitish Kumar. They tend to view him as a bulwark against the RJD's past rule, which is often painted as jungle rise or misgovernance.
So for EBCs, it's about perceived stability and recognition under Nitish.
Yes. The socio-political stability and the sense of recognition he provided, combined with some targeted welfare schemes, often seem to outweigh the lack of fundamental economic transformation for many in that group. It's a complex calculation where stable governance might trump, or at least balance immediate economic upliftment hopes.
And the opposition. The Mahagathbandhan, the MGB, led by the RJD, they're campaigning directly on fixing that economic failure, jobs, ending migration.
Their pitch is exactly that. Mass job creation, reversing the economic stagnation. They're trying to consolidate their core base, primarily Yadavs and Muslims, while also making a strong play for those EBC voters who might be dissatisfied with the status quo.
They've made specific promises too, haven't they?
Yes, rolling out welfare commitments. A notable one is the Mai Baheen Man Yojana, promising an annual payment of 30,000 boya to women. It's a direct appeal to the family unit, trying to break that EBC loyalty to Nitish.
But when you actually talk to the migrants themselves, the people working in, say, Chennai's wholesale markets, there's a lot of skepticism about these government job promises, isn't there?
Deep skepticism. You hear it consistently. They argue, quite pragmatically, that government jobs or quotas alone won't solve the fundamental issue. What they need, they say, are factories, industrial units, food processing plants in Bihar in their home districts so they can earn a decent living wage without having to leave their families.
They see the promises as empty.
As one source put it, they often view these promises as jumla, empty rhetoric. Because the core structural problems, the lack of local industry and the skewed land ownership, aren't being seriously addressed by either major political formation. The political discourse gets dominated by Mandal caste and Mandir Hindutva, while the market reality, the economic failure and wealth concentration gets pushed to the sidelines.
Okay, let's shift gears now. From political economy to a very sensitive area where law intersects with personal autonomy and social policy. The Supreme Court has been looking closely at two key pieces of legislation. Let's start with reproductive rights and the challenge to the Surrogacy Act of 2021. The specific bit under review is Section 4.3.2. This section actually stops married couples who are facing secondary infertility from using surrogacy to have a second child.
This is a really profound challenge because it forces the court to weigh the state's power to regulate, supposedly to prevent exploitation in this case, of the surrogate mother against an individual couple's reproductive choices.
And secondary infertility, just to clarify, that's when a couple has had one child successfully, but then struggles to conceive or carry a second pregnancy.
Exactly. It's a common medical issue and obviously carries a significant emotional burden. The petitioners argue that the law unfairly penalizes couples facing this specific challenge.
So what's the government's defense? Why restrict surrogacy for a second child?
The center's defense rests heavily on a legal distinction. They argue surrogacy is a statutory right, not a fundamental right, meaning they argue the Constitution doesn't guarantee anyone a fundamental right to use another person's body, the surrogates to have a child. Therefore, access to surrogacy only exists because the 2021 Act allows it. And because it's created by statute, the state can impose conditions and restrictions on it.
And they see this particular restriction as reasonable.
They argue it's reasonable and necessary, primarily to prevent the commercialization of surrogacy and stop it from becoming, essentially, an optional fertility service for couples who already have children. They want to limit it to cases of primary infertility or specific dire circumstances.
Is there any exception allowed for a second child via surrogacy?
Yes, but it's very narrow. The restriction is lifted only if the couple's existing child has a severe disability, mental or physical, or suffers from a life-threatening illness. The government says this balances genuine, acute need against the broader policy goal of tightly regulating surrogacy.
Okay, but the couples challenging this, the petitioners, they obviously disagree strongly. What's their counterargument?
Their core point is that secondary infertility is just as real and emotionally challenging as primary infertility. They argue the state is overreaching, interfering in deeply personal family planning decisions.
And they point to legal inconsistencies.
Yes. Advocate Mohini Priya, for instance, highlighted a key inconsistency in Indian law. India does not have a one-child policy. Furthermore, the Juvenile Justice Act of 2015 explicitly allows couples to adopt multiple children.
Ah, interesting point.
So the question becomes, if the state permits families to grow through multiple adoptions, why impose such a strict barrier on having a second biological child through altruistic regulated surrogacy? They argue this provision in the Surrogacy Act creates an arbitrary definition of infertility that infringes on the couple's Article 21 rights, the right to life, which encompasses bodily autonomy and family life. The Supreme Court seems to be grappling with whether this specific restriction is proportionate to the goal of protecting surrogates.
It's definitely a tricky balancing act, regulating an industry to stop exploitation without denying the genuine desires of couples facing medical infertility.
Extremely tricky. Drafting laws that fully protect the surrogate, ensuring informed consent, no coercion, no financial exploitation, while still respecting the reproductive autonomy of intending parents facing genuine medical hurdles. That's the legislative tightrope.
Okay, let's move to the second piece of social legislation the Supreme Court has been concerned about, the Protection of Children from Sexual Offenses Act, or POCSO. The issue here is its misuse.
Yes, this is a major concern the court has repeatedly flagged. The POCSO Act itself is crucial. It has very stringent provisions designed to protect children from sexual abuse, and that's absolutely necessary.
Right.
But the court is observing again and again that these powerful provisions are being used in situations the lawmakers probably never intended, specifically in cases involving consensual romantic or sexual relationships between adolescents, teenagers, basically.
And often it's not even the victim complaining, but angry parents.
That's frequently the case. The justices have noted numerous instances where parents, perhaps driven by social stigma, family honor concerns, or just disapproval of a teenage relationship, file a POCSO complaint against the boy involved.
Because the age of consent under POCSO is 18.
Correct. So technically, any sexual activity below that age, even if it's fully consensual between two teenagers close in age, falls under the Act's definition of an offense. This leads to the criminalization of young men, often for actions that lack the mens rea, the criminal intent we associate with actual predatory sexual abuse.
And the consequences for these young men can be devastating, ruining their futures over what might be, socially speaking, teenage experimentation or romance.
That's the tragic outcome the court is worried about. They've stressed an urgent need for greater awareness and sensitivity in applying the law. They're even considering issuing specific directions to government agencies and schools to spread legal literacy.
Literacy about the law itself.
Yes, particularly targeting male adolescents, educating them about the law, about consent, about gender equality. It's a recognition that just having a strict law isn't enough. You need proactive sensitization to prevent its misuse and address the underlying issues.
So this goes beyond just knowing the law. It connects to broader education.
It does. The court seems supportive of integrating ethical and behavioral training into school curricula, teaching boys and young men about respect, boundaries, consent, and the real-world legal consequences of their actions. The idea is to foster a cultural shift towards prevention and education, alongside strict enforcement against genuine predators.
Now, on a related legal point, but distinct concerning the rights of those accused of crimes, there was a significant bail judgment recently.
Yes, a very important reminder about Article 21 rights. The Bombay High Court granted bail to someone accused in the 2011 Mumbai triple blasts case. The key factor: he had spent over 13 years in jail without the trial concluding.
13 years without a trial outcome.
Exactly, and the court was emphatic. The fundamental right to a speedy trial, guaranteed under Article 21 of the Constitution, is sacrosanct. It can't just be ignored indefinitely, even if the charges are extremely serious, like terrorism, or if other laws seem to restrict bail.
So, even in the most severe cases, the principle justice delayed is justice denied holds strong.
Absolutely. The High Court followed Supreme Court precedent, specifically the K.A. Najib case from 2021. That case established that if someone is incarcerated for a prolonged period with no realistic prospect of the trial finishing soon, that lengthy detention itself becomes a violation of their fundamental rights. The state has a duty to conduct trials efficiently. If it fails, and someone languishes in jail for over a decade, the constitutional right eventually has to override the severity of the charge for bail considerations.
All right, let's shift our focus now to the global arena. A major theme playing out here is the challenge to the U.S. dollar's longstanding dominance in the world economy. And the BRICS group, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, plus the newer members like Iran, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Ethiopia, UAE, they're right at the center of this push for, well, de-dollarization.
This is a huge strategic objective for the BRICS nations, and it's largely driven by a sense of vulnerability. The U.S. dollar and the whole SWIFT payment network that runs on it is seen by many in this bloc as more than just a currency. It's viewed as a potential weapon.
A weapon? How so?
Through sanctions. The U.S. can use its control over dollar-based finance to impose powerful economic sanctions and effectively cut countries off from global trade and finance. You just have to look at Iran, now a BRICS member, which has faced crippling U.S. sanctions for years. That experience really underscores the desire among BRICS members for greater financial independence or sovereignty and less exposure to Western financial leverage.
This isn't a brand new goal, though. They set up the new development bank, the NDB, almost a decade ago, didn't they? How close are they to having an actual alternative payment system?
The progress has been steady, but it seems to be picking up steam. After the NDB in 2014 and the contingent reserve arrangement, the next big step is this BRICS cross-border payments initiative. People are calling it BRICS Pay. A prototype was showcased quite publicly at the Kazan summit in Russia in 2024.
And how would BRICS Pay actually work? What's the mechanism?
The focus seems to be on two things mainly. First, strengthening direct banking relationships between member countries' correspondent banking. Second, creating a unified platform or framework that allows businesses to settle trade directly in their own local currencies, bypassing the need to convert everything through the U.S. dollar first.
But hold on, many of these BRICS members already have pretty sophisticated domestic payment systems. Russia has its SDFS, China has CIPS, India's got UPI, which is expanding internationally, Brazil has PIX. Doesn't that create a problem? Like internal competition?
It absolutely does. That's probably the biggest internal hurdle they face in getting a unified system off the ground quickly. The underlying infrastructure is there. China's CPS, for example, is already used by banks in all BRICS countries, but there's definitely competition for which system might become dominant within the bloc.
So China pushes CPS, India pushes UPI.
Exactly. Beijing would naturally like to see CPS become the global alternative to SWIFT. India, meanwhile, is very successfully promoting UPI as this low-cost, real-time payment marvel, and it's already accepted in several non-BRICS countries. This kind of national rivalry inevitably slows down the creation of a single, truly seamless, interoperable BRICS system that could genuinely challenge SWIFT's global reach and reliability.
So if internal competition slows things down, what could possibly speed it up? What might force these nations, despite wanting to promote their own systems, to really rally around a joint BRICS Pay project?
External pressure. Most likely, perceived threats from the United States itself. Think about the rhetoric we heard from President-elect Donald Trump threatening massive, like 100%, tariffs on any country trying to create a BRICS currency or any alternative to replace the mighty U.S. dollar.
Ah, so that kind of aggressive stance could backfire.
It could act as a powerful unifying force. If BRICS countries feel their trade and economic stability are being directly threatened from outside, the political will needed among their leaders to prioritize a joint payment system over their individual national platforms suddenly becomes much stronger. The threat of being squeezed by the dollar system might just be the catalyst that pushes them towards collective financial defense.
That global financial maneuvering is one kind of security challenge. Let's pivot to another deeply troubling one. The rise of these industrial-scale digital scam centers, particularly in Southeast Asia. This isn't just petty crime, it's transnational organized crime on a huge scale.
It's a horrific situation and a very serious security threat for India, both for citizens being victimized and those being trapped. These scam operations are running like factories. They specialize in things like digital arrest scams.
Where they impersonate police or officials?
Yes, convincing victims they're under investigation and need to transfer money immediately, and also the incredibly manipulative pig butchering frauds. These hubs are often located in regions plagued by conflict, especially in Myanmar's special economic zones along the border, where the state's authority effectively collapsed after the 2021 military coup.
Can you walk us through the human side of this? How are people, including Indians, getting trapped in these operations?
It's truly heartbreaking. It often starts with human trafficking disguised as opportunity. Victims, and we know thousands of Indians are among them, are lured by fake online job ads, often promising high-paying tech or customer service roles in places like Thailand.
So they travel willingly at first.
Often, yes. They might fly to Thailand where entry can be visa-free, thinking they're heading to a legitimate job. But then they're taken, sometimes forcibly, across the border into Myanmar, into these heavily guarded compounds. These places are essentially digital prisons, often run by ethnic militias who've struck deals with the military junta that seized power.
And once inside, they're forced to become scammers themselves.
Precisely. They're subjected to violence, threats, surveillance, sometimes starvation, immense coercion to force them to run these elaborate scams against people back in their home countries, or anywhere, really. Pig butchering, for instance, is psychologically brutal. The scammer builds trust, often a fake romance or friendship over weeks or months. That's the fattening the pig part. Then, once the victim trusts them, they convince them to invest huge sums in fake cryptocurrency schemes or other fraudulent platforms. That's the butchering.
And these operations are linked to the conflict in Myanmar.
Directly. The 2021 coup created a power vacuum. Many ethnic armed groups, some rebranding themselves as border guard forces allied with the junta, saw a massive profit opportunity. They provide the secure territory, the infrastructure, and the impunity for these scam centers to operate, taking a cut of the profits. And the evidence strongly points to Chinese organized crime syndicates being the masterminds behind many of these vast networks.
Following the money must be incredibly difficult if it's flowing through these lawless zones.
Exceptionally difficult. The proceeds get laundered through complex layers. They use mules individuals or shell companies to handle initial cash movements. Funds often pass through dubious financial institutions, like Huioni Pay in Cambodia, which has been implicated. Then very quickly, the money is converted into cryptocurrency, making it almost impossible to trace back to the criminals or recover for the victims. For India, it's this terrible double crisis. Citizens at home losing their savings, and citizens trapped abroad forced to commit crimes.
What kind of response does India need to mount against such a complex transnational threat?
It really has to be a multi-layered response. Domestically, India needs to significantly beef up its cybercrime fighting infrastructure, better technology, more trained personnel. And a massive coordinated public awareness campaign is crucial. The RBI, the Home Ministry, state police forces, they all need to hammer home the warning signs of digital arrest scams, investment fraud, those too good to be true job offers.
And internationally, regionally.
That's critical too. India needs sustained, robust diplomatic engagement. It needs to work closely with countries like Thailand, China, Vietnam, Laos, countries that are either transit routes or also affected, to put coordinated pressure on the Myanmar junta and the militias hosting these compounds. The goal has to be dismantling these operations and securing the release of the thousands of trafficked captives. It demands a level of regional security cooperation that's historically been quite challenging to achieve in Southeast Asia.
Just briefly, touching on another potential economic pressure point, you mentioned U.S. protectionist legislation earlier, the Hire Eat Act.
Yes, the proposed Halting International Relocation of Employment Act in the U.S. If it were to become law, it could impose a very steep 25% tax on American companies making outsourcing payments.
And outsourcing payments is broadly defined.
Very broadly. Basically, payments to foreign entities or individuals for services that were previously or could be performed by U.S. employees.
That sounds like it could hit India's huge IT and BPO sector hard. Which parts are most vulnerable?
Congressional leaders in the U.S. themselves warned this could have a direct and deep impact on India. The most exposed segments would likely be the traditional business process outsourcing call centers, back-office work, and the more routine transactional IT services. While high-end R&D or specialized global capability centers might have some insulation, the basic cost advantage for many Indian service providers would be significantly eroded by a 25% tax. It would certainly force Indian IT giants to accelerate diversification and rethink their global delivery models.
Okay, let's bring our focus back home now to some critical environmental challenges within India. The Green India Mission, or GIM, has this really ambitious target: restoring 25 million hectares of degraded land by 2030. That's huge. A major commitment to creating a carbon sink and fighting climate change.
It's a necessary scale of ambition, definitely. But the crucial question, the one policymakers really need to grapple with, isn't just about the area covered. It's about the quality and the long-term survival of that restoration.
Quality meaning?
Meaning, are we planting the right things in the right places? And are we ensuring these restored ecosystems can actually withstand future climate stress? There was a recent study led by IIT that should be a real wake-up call. It found a significant decline, about 12%, in the photosynthetic efficiency of India's existing dense forests.
12% decline. So the trees we already have are actually becoming less effective at soaking up CO2.
Primarily due to rising temperatures and increasing water stress, drying soil conditions. It's a direct impact of climate change already happening. And this finding really challenges the simplistic idea that just planting more trees automatically solves the problem.
Right. If the existing forests are struggling, just adding more potentially vulnerable trees might not achieve the goal.
Exactly. It tells us that restoration efforts must focus fundamentally on building ecological resilience. We need to make these forests stronger, more adaptable to climate change, not just hit plantation targets on paper. And to do that, we absolutely have to fix three persistent gaps in how India manages environmental projects. Participation, design, and financing.
Okay, let's take those one by one. First, participation. We often see these big government plantation drives that seem to ignore the local communities living there.
And often, that exclusion isn't just bad practice, it's actually illegal. You have around 200 million people in India who depend directly on forests for their livelihoods. The Forest Rights Act, the FRA of 2006, explicitly empowers these communities, through their Gram Sabhas or village councils, to manage and protect their traditional forest areas.
But plantation drives often bypass the FRA.
Frequently, large-scale top-down plantation projects often fail to ensure proper FRA compliance. They don't get the consent or involve the Gram Sabhas meaningfully. This not only erodes trust, but also means the local people, who have the most knowledge and the biggest stake in the forest's health, have no ownership or incentive to protect the saplings long-term.
So without local buy-in, the plantation might just wither away after the project ends.
Precisely. The success stories we do see, like joint forest management in Odisha or some community-led biodiversity projects in Chhattisgarh, they all demonstrate that meaningful, legally sound community participation isn't optional. It's essential for long-term success. Without it, you get a temporary project, not lasting restoration.
Okay, gap number 2, design. You mentioned planting the right things. This relates to the issue of monocultures.
Yes, a huge issue. For decades, government afforestation programs often favored planting vast areas with just one or two species, usually fast-growing non-natives like eucalyptus or acacia. Why? Because they grow quickly and let officials meet their planting targets easily.
But they're bad for the environment.
Ecologically, they can be disastrous. Monocultures often deplete local groundwater. They offer very little habitat for native wildlife, suppressing biodiversity, and they tend to be much more vulnerable to pests, diseases, and climate shocks, like drought, compared to diverse native forests. The GIM blueprint actually does promise a shift towards using native site-appropriate species.
That sounds good on paper, but making that shift happen on the ground, that requires a big change in how local forest departments work, doesn't it? They're used to those simple targets.
It requires a massive change in institutional capacity and mindset. You need to train and equip local forest officials with the ecological knowledge to move beyond just planting monoculture rows towards genuine ecological restoration. That means understanding local soil types, water availability, native plant communities, and designing planting schemes that mimic natural ecosystems. It's a scientific capacity challenge within the bureaucracy, but it can be done. Look at Tamil Nadu's success in significantly increasing its mangrove cover using native species that delivered both carbon sequestration and vital coastal protection.
Which brings us to the third gap, Financing. India actually has a massive fund specifically for afforestation, the CAMP Fund, but it's notoriously underutilized.
That's right. The Compensatory Afforestation Fund Management and Planning Authority, CAMPA, holds a truly staggering amount of money, something like 95,000 crore collected from projects that divert forest land. So the problem isn't a lack of funds.
It's getting the money spent effectively.
It's the bureaucratic hurdles, the complex approval processes, and ultimately a low rate of utilization by many states. Delhi, for example, apparently spent only about 23% of the funds approved for it between 2019 and 2024. This inefficiency means critical restoration work simply isn't happening, or happening far too slowly, despite the money being available.
So, apart from just pushing states to spend the CAMPIA money better, are there more innovative ways to finance this kind of ecological resilience?
Yes, and that's crucial. We need smarter, perhaps more decentralized approaches. Himachal Pradesh, for instance, is exploring using biochar, converting waste biomass into charcoal to generate carbon credits, which also reduces forest fire risk. Uttar Pradesh is looking at ways to link village councils directly to voluntary carbon markets, allowing them to earn revenue for protecting and restoring local ecosystems. These kinds of models potentially bypass the centralized CAMP logjam and create direct financial incentives for local communities to become environmental stewards.
This whole theme of building resilience, especially ecological resilience, ties directly into how coastal states like Odisha deal with natural disasters, particularly cyclones. Odisha has become famous for saving lives, but struggles to protect livelihoods. It's been called the Odisha paradox.
It really is the stark paradox of modern disaster management. The Odisha State Disaster Management Authority, OSDMA, is genuinely world-class in its primary mission, saving lives. Their early warning systems, the evacuation procedures, they're incredibly effective. Think about it. Fatalities dropped from around 10,000 in the 1999 supercyclone to just 2 during Cyclone Yas in 2021. Phenomenal success.
Truly remarkable. But the story after the cyclone passes, the economic recovery, that's where the struggle lies.
That's where the system often fails the survivors. The immediate economic impact of a major cyclone is devastating, and it triggers a longer secondary slowdown. After Cyclone Fani, for example, estimates suggested nearly 7 crore rural working days were lost. That translates to something like 2,700 crore in lost wages alone.
Just wages lost, never mind assets.
Exactly. Farmers lose their entire standing crop just before harvest. Fishermen lose boats, nets, their entire means of earning. Small shopkeepers, artisans, their businesses are wiped out. And then they face the slow, often difficult process of trying to get insurance payouts or government compensation, which rarely covers the full loss. This immediate loss of income and assets pushes families deep into debt and entrenches poverty.
And there's a longer-term ecological impact that also hits livelihoods, especially for coastal communities.
Absolutely. Severe cyclones bring massive storm surges, pushing seawater far inland. This saltwater intrusion contaminates freshwater sources and degrades fertile agricultural land, sometimes for years. Coastal wetlands, which are vital fish nurseries, get damaged. This environmental degradation forces farmers to shift to less profitable, salt-tolerant crops, or worse, forces them off the land altogether, fueling migration, just like we discussed in the context of Bihar's economic situation. It impacts social stability, too.
So given this paradox, what's the next step for Odisha? How can they build on their success in saving lives to also protect and rebuild livelihoods more effectively?
The strategy really has to evolve toward building comprehensive resilience, both financial and natural. On the financial side, it means radically improving the speed and simplicity of insurance claim settlements, ensuring immediate access to emergency credit lines for affected households and small businesses, and maybe expanding the scope of MGNRIGS, the Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme, to explicitly focus on post-disaster asset restoration, rebuilding embankments, desilting ponds, clearing farmland, repairing community infrastructure.
And the natural resilience part.
That means investing seriously in nature-based solutions. We know, for instance, that healthy mangrove forests along the coast act as incredible natural barriers. Studies show a dense stand of mangroves can reduce the energy of storm waves by up to 90%. That's far more effective and sustainable protection in many cases than expensive, rigid concrete seawalls, which can also have negative ecological impacts. Promoting mangrove restoration, protecting coastal ecosystems, that has to be central to a long-term livelihood protection strategy.
Okay, for our final segment, let's take a really dramatic leap. From the resilience of ecosystems here on Earth to the absolute frontier of fundamental physics. The quest for a theory of quantum gravity. This is about trying to unite Einstein's theory of gravity, general relativity, with the weird world of quantum mechanics.
It truly is the biggest unsolved puzzle in physics, the Holy Grail, as some call it. We have general relativity, which works beautifully to describe gravity on the large scales, planets, stars, galaxies. And we have quantum mechanics, which brilliantly describes the other three fundamental forces, electromagnetism, the weak and strong nuclear forces down at the subatomic level.
So what's the problem? Why can't we just merge them?
The problem is gravity itself. It's incredibly, incredibly weak compared to the other forces, billions and billions of times weaker. This means its quantum effects. The tiny fluctuations and interactions predicted by theory are almost impossibly small and subtle. We simply can't generate enough gravitational force in a lab, even with something like the Large Hadron Collider, the LHC, to directly measure these quantum gravitational effects.
So if Earthbound experiments are out, we have to look to the cosmos, find places where gravity is naturally extreme enough for these quantum effects to become noticeable.
Exactly. And the best natural laboratories we know of for extreme gravity are black holes. Back in the 1970s, Stephen Hawking made a groundbreaking theoretical discovery. He showed that black holes aren't completely black. Due to quantum effects right at the edge of the event horizon, pairs of virtual particles constantly pop into existence. Sometimes one particle falls into the black hole while the other escapes.
And the escaping particle carries energy away.
Precisely. To an outside observer, it looks like the black hole itself is radiating energy. This is the famous Hawking radiation. Its prediction was revolutionary because it showed, theoretically, that gravity, black holes, and quantum mechanics must interact at this fundamental boundary of space-time.
But detecting this Hawking radiation from the kind of black holes astronomers actually observe, the ones with masses millions or billions of times that of the sun, that's basically impossible, right? They're too big and cold.
Correct. The temperature of a black hole, and thus the intensity of its Hawking radiation, is inversely proportional to its mass. Big astrophysical black holes are incredibly cold, colder even than the faint afterglow of the Big Bang, the cosmic microwave background. So their Hawking radiation is completely swamped by background noise, making it undetectable with current technology.
Which leads us to this new theoretical study. It proposes looking for something else, something called black hole morsels.
Yes, this is a fascinating new theoretical idea. Black hole morsels are hypothesized micro-black holes. The theory suggests they could be much, much smaller than typical black holes, maybe around the mass of an asteroid. Crucially, they'd be significantly hotter.
Asteroid mass. How would something like that even form?
The idea is they might be born in the most violent events the universe offers. The mergers of two large black holes. When these behemoths collide and spiral into each other, the gravitational forces are unimaginable. The theory proposes that during this chaotic coalescence, the rapidly changing spacetime geometry could potentially pinch off tiny, extremely dense pockets of energy in spacetime, leaving behind these residual micro-black holes or morsels.
Okay, so they're tiny, potentially asteroid mass, and formed in black hole mergers. Why is that significant for detecting quantum effects?
Yeah.
Because they're hotter.
Exactly. Remember, temperature is inversely proportional to mass. Being so much smaller means these morsels would be incredibly hot compared to their parent black holes, and therefore they would radiate Hawking radiation much, much more intensely.
Hot enough to be detectable.
Hot enough that their evaporation via Hawking radiation would be relatively rapid, culminating in a final explosive burst of energy. The calculations in this new study suggest this final evaporation burst would produce a very specific, potentially observable signature.
What kind of signature? What should astronomers be looking for?
The prediction is for a delayed burst of high-energy gamma rays. This burst would occur after the main gravitational wave signal from the black hole merger has already been detected by instruments like LIGO and Virgo. And critically, this gamma ray burst from the evaporating morsel should be isotropic.
Isotropic meaning?
Meaning it radiates equally in all directions. This is different from typical gamma ray bursts associated with things like collapsing stars, which are usually highly focused jets of energy. This predicted isotropic nature of the delayed burst is the key distinguishing feature that future observations would need to confirm.
Wow. So if astronomers observe a black hole merger via gravitational waves and then sometime later detect a burst of high-energy gamma rays coming from roughly the same direction, and crucially that burst looks like it's spread out equally in all directions, what would that actually mean for physics?
It would be absolutely monumental. It would represent the first direct experimental evidence of quantum gravitational phenomena. It would essentially leapfrog decades of purely theoretical speculation and give us an actual observational window into how gravity behaves at the quantum level.
A window into new physics.
Exactly. Hawking radiation itself is thought to carry information, subtle imprints, about the fundamental quantum structure of spacetime near the black hole. Detecting it, especially from these morsels, could potentially give us clues about the internal workings of gravity at the Planck scale, the tiniest possible scale, helping us test fundamental theories like string theory or loop quantum gravity in ways the LHC simply cannot. And the exciting part is, instruments that could potentially detect such signals are already operating high-energy gamma-ray telescopes like the HES-S array in Namibia, HAWC in Mexico, and the Fermi Gamma-Ray Space Telescope. They could already be searching for this unique delayed isotropic signature. Hashtag tag tag outro.
Well, that was quite a journey. We went from the fine print of electoral enumeration forms in India all the way to the evaporation of hypothetical black holes at the edge of the cosmos. We've traced connections between Bihar's economic struggles, India's global financial strategy, and the urgent need for real ecological resilience.
And throughout, our aim was really to structure that complex information, to draw out those connections, hopefully providing you with knowledge that's not just interesting, but applicable for deeper analysis and critical thinking. We saw time and again how policy challenges, whether it's cleaning voter rolls, regulating surrogacy, managing disaster recovery, or even financing forests, often boil down to fundamental issues of administrative capacity, political will, and getting the implementation right, even when the laws or the technology seem to be there.
So let's leave you with a final thought to chew on, one that circles right back to our very first topic: electoral integrity and those voter rolls. We discussed how the current political opposition to the EC's intensive revision often frames itself around constitutional values, procedural fairness, the risk of disenfranchisement from a messy process. But let's game out the alternative for a moment.
Imagine the Election Commission fully embraces that verification by design concept we talked about. Suppose they successfully leverage ISNet, maybe integrate it seamlessly with robust national databases like Aadhaar purely for verification, and actually achieve a state of near-perfect, perpetually accurate electoral rolls. No duplicates, minimal administrative error or discretion.
What happens then? Does the nature of political opposition shift entirely? If the process becomes technically almost flawless, almost unimpeachable, do opponents then start questioning the integrity of the process and start questioning the very existence of a perpetually perfect national voter database itself?
Think about the political dynamics. Is there perhaps unspoken political leverage for some actors in the very chaos and potential manipulability of a messy electoral roll? And conversely, is there a potential loss of leverage if the database becomes so accurate that challenging individual entries becomes almost impossible?
That potential shift from fighting over the process to fighting over the principle of a perfect database, that's a really fundamental implication of technology meeting governance that you should definitely keep in mind as these systems evolve. Something to think about.